Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time, Early and others helped promote the lost cause in the post-war period. Now we continue that discussion as he attacks both James Longstreet and William Mahone. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The cult created around Robert E. Lee and fostered by Jubal Early grew and grew in the years after the Army commander's death. The statue in Richmond, Virginia was unveiled in the 1890s, but in between his death and the unveiling and beyond, Early fought a brutal war of words with Lee's old warhorse, James Longstreet. Longstreet had become the target of the lost causers for a couple of reasons. One, he simply criticized Robert E. Lee, and two, he joined the Republican Party and supported African American civil rights. However, Longstreet didn't fight for civil rights out of a humanitarian reason. He believed that voting rights for black men was inevitable, and that the best way to control the African American population would be to join the Republican Party. Longstreet's detractors ignored his white supremacist reasons for joining the party and attacked him as a traitor to the Confederacy and the Confederate cause. This made him an easy target for Early, who truly believed Longstreet was to blame for the debacle at Gettysburg. But because Early already put Lee on a pedestal, Early was looking for someone to blame other than Lee. To make matters even worse for Longstreet, Longstreet himself began writing and telling the public that he was Lee's closest advisor, and he definitely was, but he went further and began to take credit for all of Lee's successes, saying that he was the one who gave Lee his best ideas, and when Lee lost, it was because he went against Longstreet's judgment. Early and Longstreet began a war of words as Early attempted to discredit Longstreet and praise Lee, and Longstreet attempted to clear his name of wrongdoing. Early went after Longstreet with an unremitting pen. In the 1870s, Early and other members of the Lee cult would write articles praising Lee and attacking Longstreet. They would be in retaliation to a series of Longstreet articles published in the Philadelphia Times. After reading some of the articles, Early had the ammunition to fire back at Longstreet. Early knew that from Longstreet's wounding, at the Battle of the Wilderness, Longstreet got wounded by his own men along the Orange Plank Road. The wound essentially paralyzed his right arm. He therefore needed help writing articles fighting back against Early. Early picked up on this and attacked Longstreet for using another writer to construct his articles. Early even called it unmanly to do so. Longstreet responded to this attack by writing, "Without proceeding directly against the essential parts of my narrative, they raise a clamor of objection and denial. One of the chief elements of this tom-tom warfare is found in the fact that, owing to wounds received in the honorable service of my country which have virtually paralyzed my right arm, and made it impossible for me to write, save under great pain and constraint, I have been compelled to accept the services of a professional writer. Upon such trifling casuals as this, do my enemies propose to build their histories and amend mine. The attempt is at once pitiful and disgraceful." Early enlisted the help of as many pro-Lee forces as he could muster to discredit all of Longstreet's accounts of the Battle of Gettysburg and accused him of insubordination by not attacking the Union earlier on the second day of the battle. Men like Cadmus Wilcox and William C. Oates threw in their opinions on the matter and attacked Longstreet for his actions at Gettysburg. One of Early's biographers wrote, "That campaign to destroy a man's name was one of the most extraordinary and cynical manipulations of history in the annals of American publishing. The hand that fine-tuned the campaign was that of a clever lawyer, as well as a master editor and writer. Jubal acted the prosecutor, judge, and jury. His weapons were the number and diversity of witnesses. The authors within the Southern Historical Society papers, the defendant implicating himself on the stand, the use of Longstreet's own writings, albeit unauthorized, the marshaling of evidence, the detailed tracking of events in the Gettysburg battle, meticulously accurate in many important respects, and thus more credible. The total presentation adds up to a carefully contrived tissue of falsehood, all the more devastating for its mimicry of justice and fairness, abetted by Longstreet's own stubborn refusal to protect himself effectively, for that matter his apparent willingness to dig his own grave. Jubal's victory was almost a foregone conclusion." The contrived tissue of falsehood refers to William Pendleton's assertion that there was a dawn order for July 2nd for Longstreet to attack. Lee's own staffers refuted the claim, but it stuck nonetheless. Jefferson Davis, the one and only president of the Confederacy, quoted Pendleton's speech about the dawn order in his book, the rise and fall of the Confederate government, adding more weight against Longstreet. Early's campaign destroyed Longstreet's reputation with former Confederates and their descendants, so much so that when Longstreet died, less than 5% of the United Confederate Veterans groups approved resolutions to pay tribute to Longstreet. The United Daughters of the Confederacy in Savannah, Georgia, refused to send flowers to Longstreet's funeral. Early recalled that he didn't like to engage with former Confederates in battles of words over memory, but he relished his battles with ex-Confederate William Mahone. Mahone in the post-war period snuggled up to Republicans and even advocated for some of their policies. He also became wealthy from his railroad interests. When a flattering biographical article came out about Mahone in a historical magazine, near the top it stated that the manuscript had been shown to Mahone and approved of by him as to its historical accuracy. Early was already irritated at Mahone, and he used this article to whittle away at him. For one, Mahone claimed to have captured Union Army Commander George Meade's headquarters and run the general off the field at Spotsylvania Courthouse. Early attacked him for lying and disrespecting other Confederate generals in the process. Also within Mahone's article, the author stated, Mahone's judgment was justified by the proverb in regard to Early at West Point that although his name was Early, he was always late. Mahone said that he did not like to fight under him, that Jubal was always hesitating whether to fight or not. He would ride up and down the lines from 15 to 20 minutes debating whether or not to begin, whereas the battle was to be lost or won meanwhile. Early called out Mahone in a personal letter citing the article. Mahone wrote back if he could see the article because he had not read it. Early sent the magazine a few days later. Mahone responded in a long rambling letter, half apologizing and half standing up for some of his statements, admitting that he had only seen an abbreviated portion before this time. Early responded, To escape from this dilemma, you have resorted to the expedient of all men who embark on a career of deception, and like all such men you have signally failed in your purpose. Your whole answer is disingenuous and evasive. You have not responded to the question whether you use the language quoted, but have put in a sort of special plea, very unskilfully drawn, and which I cannot but regard as a miserable subterfuge. Early declared Mahone palpably guilty of a most unsoldierly and unworthy attempt to establish for yourself a fictitious reputation upon the ruins of those of your brother officers. In the whole memoir, I have failed to discover a solitary expression of a kind or liberal word or sentiment in regard to any of your old comrades, from the commanding general down, save and except General Jackson, under whom you never serviced, and along with praise of him is the impudent pretense that his mantle had fallen on you. Great God, Stonewall Jackson and Billy Mahone, Hyperion to a satyr! I cannot pursue this subject further, and leave you alone in your glory. With Early's harsh words, Lee's bad old man had boxed Mahone into a corner. He could either retract his statements in the article and lose face, or challenge Early to a duel. Before a duel could be challenged, friends of Early and friends of Mahone stepped in and interceded. The result benefited Early greatly. Early would withdraw his offensive letter, and Mahone would acknowledge Jubal's right to question the article, disavow any intention to hurt Early or anyone else, and recognize that an injustice had been done. In 1890, Early's old enemy from the Valley, Major General George Crook, came to visit him in Lynchburg. Crook remained in the Army after the war and was still actively serving. He gave a great account of Early in this later stage of the general's life. While waiting, we met General Early. He is much stooped and enfeebled, but as bitter and violent as an adder. He has no use for the government or Northern people, boasts of his being unreconstructed, and that he won't accept a pardon for his rebellious offenses. He is living entirely in the past. He has fought his battles so many times that he has worked himself into the belief that many of the exaggerated and some ridiculous stories he tells are true. We sat up with him until after 12 midnight, taking a hot scotch with him the last thing. Lieutenant Lyman Kennon came to visit the general around this time too. He was writing a study of the 1864 Valley Campaign and wanted to interview Early. Early agreed, and over the course of 3 days they talked and visited the Lynchburg battlefield. On the way back from the battlefield into the town of Lynchburg, Early pointed to a few houses along one particular street and announced, "Here is where the accommodating ladies of the town live. There's one of them now, sitting in the window." A young man named Robert Yancey befriended Early and enjoyed spending time with the general, hearing the stories of the war. Yancey loved to recount one story where, while Early was away, the building where Early lived and worked had been damaged by fire, and became condemned and in the process of being destroyed. Early arrived in town and went upstairs to his room, sat down at his table, and began going through his belongings and stacks of papers. All of a sudden, the building collapsed. Yancey organized a rescue party, and they began to search for the old man. Amazingly, they found him. The timbers of the building, instead of falling on Early, acted as a brace against the rest of the building falling on him. When Yancey found the old man covered in plaster dust, Early enthusiastically responded, "Hey, Bob, blast my hat to hell. I didn't know you were up there, boy. You get me a julep." Yancey brought him a couple of juleps and sent them down into the rubble in a basket. The rescuers finally got him out, with a few of the juleps inside of Early. On February 15, 1894, Early went to the post office in a hired carriage, as he did almost every day, but as he exited the building, he stumbled and rolled down into the street. People came to help him and got him back into the post office. Doctors were brought in. It appeared something was wrong, although Early refused medical treatment. He was taken home in the carriage, but he refused to get out and demanded the carriage take him back downtown so he could work out of his office at the bank. The carriage driver did as he was told. Early attempted to work as though nothing had happened, but the fall had hurt his back, but no bones were broken. After a few days of working in pain, he remained at home, eating intermittently. Numerous friends came to be by his side as the general's health deteriorated. When they heard about the old general's health failing, Confederate Generals Fitzhugh Lee and Dabney H. Maury came to be by the general's side, and one of his old staffers and good friend John Warwick Daniel came from Washington, D.C., where he was performing his senatorial duties, to be by the general's side. At 10:30 p.m. on Friday, March 2, 1894, Jubal Early passed away, with his hand clasped in John Daniel's hand. The funeral was held on March 5th in Lynchburg. The procession included the entire corps of cadets from the Virginia Military Institute and local militia units, with the old battle flag of the 11th Virginia Infantry holding a prominent position in the procession. More than 300 Confederate veterans either marched or rode horses in the caravan of admirers of Early. Early's hearse was pulled by 4 beautiful black horses. A soldier behind the hearse led the general's horse, with his sword on the saddle and his boots reversed in the stirrups. The funeral was held in the St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Then the body was taken to Spring Hill Cemetery, where the Lynchburg Light Artillery Blues fired a 17-gun salute and a bugler sounded taps. While the casket was still open, John Daniel approached it and kissed the brow of his old commander, whom he fought alongside in many battles. Then the body was laid to rest. Jubal Early was a controversial figure, even in his own time, not following traditional norms, like openly living with a woman unmarried and fathering multiple children with her. The irreligious Early was profane, irritable, and irascible, but deeply passionate. He loved the Union and fought against secession with determination. But once his state of Virginia withdrew from the Union that he loved, the United States no longer became his country. He now fought for another, and would continue to do so for the rest of his life. He fought at First Manassas, on the peninsula, during the 7 days, at Cedar Mountain, Second Manassas, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Second Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, and rose to lieutenant general during the Overland Campaign, battling Grant across the Virginia landscape. Robert E. Lee set him loose in the Shenandoah Valley, with Early pushing all the way to the fortifications of Washington, diverting incredible amounts of Union soldiers from Grant's operations around Petersburg. His initial success in the valley soon turned to defeat, and he fell out of favor with the Southern public, even though Lee had confidence in him. When Lee surrendered, he refused to, first traveling to Mexico, then Canada. When he finally returned to Virginia, he helped create the Lee cult and began attacking one of his former comrades, James Longstreet, who represented Confederate defeat, and Early believed Longstreet had stabbed the Confederacy and himself in the back with his actions at Gettysburg and with switching political parties after the war. Of all Confederate generals, Early may have the longest lasting legacy because of his efforts to create the lost cause. Despite his solid military record, he will be most remembered for promoting the lost cause and raising Lee and Stonewall Jackson to demigod status. As for the man himself, Jubal Early will always be Lee's bad old man.